Welcome, dear dreamer. Tonight, let the weight of the day melt away, and step with me into a dimly lit chamber where the scent of dried lavender mingles with the faint bitterness of old stone walls. The fire crackles gently in the hearth, and a single candle flickers beside a polished mirror, warped, uneven, yet sacred to the woman who dares to gaze into it. But tell me, what would you be willing to endure just to be seen as beautiful? Not in your eyes, but in the eyes of men, of clergy, of society, of God. In the Middle Ages, a woman's face was more than just skin. It was currency, it was fate, it was reputation. Her entire life could hinge upon the slope of her nose, the paleness of her skin, the curve of her eyebrows. And so, late at night, when others slept, some women leaned into their mirrors, polished metal at best, crude silvered glass at worst, and studied the geography of their faces by candlelight, seeing not just a reflection, but a verdict. The room is cold. The wind slips under the wooden door with a whistle, stirring the hem of her woolen dress. There is no privacy, not really. Her sisters sleep behind a thin curtain. The hearth is shared, and secrets are hard to keep. But vanity is a quiet rebellion, and beauty is the only power allowed. So she opens her little wooden box. Inside, a paste made from lead and vinegar, its texture gritty, its smell sharp and unnatural. She dabs it carefully on her cheeks, chasing the pale complexion of the Virgin Mary. A holy face, untouched by labor or sun. In the logic of the time, to be fair-skinned was to be noble. To be tan was to confess peasantry, to admit a life spent under the sky. Sun-kissed meant shame. And yet, oh, how the lead burns. Not at once, not like fire, but slowly. First, a numbness, then a tightening, then days later, a flake, a blister. Still, she smiles when the priest glances her way. Beauty is worth the pain, is it not?
You might imagine medieval life as coarse, and it was, but that does not mean it lacked obsession. On the contrary, in the damp castles and crowded towns of the 13th and 14th centuries, beauty became a symbol of salvation. And for women, that meant discipline. They plucked their hairlines to widen their foreheads, considered high and intelligent. They used burnt almonds to darken their eyebrows, ground pearls for powder, and sometimes even swallowed mercury as a tonic. Not to grow strong, but to look delicate. And delicacy was survival. No woman ruled her own fate. Her father arranged her marriage, her husband controlled her choices, the church dictated her morality. But if she was beautiful, just beautiful enough, she might soften her master's hand, attract a better match, or escape suspicion. Beauty was not just vanity, it was strategy. It was insurance. It was armor. Still, the mirror in her hand tells a different story. It distorts, it mocks, it reflects not just features, but fears. A wrinkle too early, a spot after last week's illness, the horror of aging, of being seen one day as unworthy of gaze. And so she leans closer, candlelight trembling, casting shadows that move like whispers. Perhaps she wonders, is she improving or disappearing? Outside, the world is cruel. Markets reek of spoiled fish, the air is thick with smoke and manure, and women in childbirth cry out in rooms just steps away. But inside this flickering moment, beauty feels like control, or at least the illusion of it. As you drift off now, imagine that mirror again, the cold metal against warm fingertips, the silence of a world that never really sees her, not entirely, and the bravery it takes to believe night after night that a better face might lead to a better fate.
Close your eyes now and imagine a stone courtyard damp with the morning mist, where noble women glide like ghosts beneath layers of embroidered fabric. Their faces are pale as candle wax, their eyes lowered modestly, their steps slow and deliberate. To be seen, but not too much. To be noticed, but not loud. The face must whisper, never speak. In the Middle Ages, your face was your future, not just in courtship, but in social rank, inheritance, morality, and survival. The architecture of your features, whether shaped by nature or by powder and prayer, was a declaration. I am worthy. I am chaste. I am not like them. And who were they? They were the peasants, the laborers, the women whose cheeks burned from sun and whose hands bore calluses like metals. Their faces were honest, yes, but honesty was dangerous. Beauty carefully curated was protection. It drew a line between us and them. The poor could be kind, virtuous even, but not beautiful in the right way, and that difference mattered. So noble women learned early. To tan was to sin. A freckle was a failure. A birthmark in certain corners of Europe was a sign of demonic influence. One mole too many, and a woman might find herself questioned, not about her habits, but about her soul. You can almost hear the clink of silver trays as maids prepare the morning rituals. Warm water scented with rosemary, small knives to scrape away dead skin, mortars grinding chalk, bone dust, or crushed eggshells. Nothing was wasted, and everything had a purpose, even the discomfort. You might smile now, imagining a lady fussing over her pores in a drafty chamber, but remember, her reflection is not about vanity. It's about duty, because an unkempt face could bring shame to her father's house. A single pimple, wrongly timed, might cost her a betrothal. Beauty was family business.
And if you were unlucky enough to be almost noble, a merchant's daughter, say, or a squire's wife, the pressure was even worse. You had to perform nobility through appearance because your blood did not guarantee it. That meant endless tricks, rubbing vinegar into your skin until it stung, applying ground lead under your eyes to create shadows, or holding ice to your lips to make them redder for just a few moments at a feast. The face had to lie, believably. But then there were the accidents, the cruel truths. Smallpox scars, often hidden with thick white grease paint. Acne treated with pig fat and ash, leaving infections worse than before. And for some, a single outbreak, a rash, a disfigurement, and the whispers began. She is cursed. She sinned. She's fallen from God's grace. Because in a world where medicine was mystery, a blemish might be proof of a failing soul. Even childbirth, that sacred expected duty, could betray a woman's beauty. The swelling, the tears, the exhaustion. If she survived, she might be marked forever by it. But a good wife didn't complain. She powdered her face, braided her hair, and returned to the hall, with quiet pride and quiet pain. At court, it was a competition. The queen herself set the tone.
If she wore crushed berries on her cheeks, so did every woman with a mirror. If she plucked her eyebrows into thin arches, they all followed, no matter how absurd or how uncomfortable. Trends moved slowly, but the consequences of not following them were swift. And always, always, it was the face that led. The first thing a suitor saw, the last thing a dying husband remembered, the canvas of a woman's entire social value. Let your thoughts drift now. Imagine those courtyards again, but see the cracks beneath the paint, the bruises hidden beneath the silks. Faces smooth as porcelain, but trembling under the weight of judgment. Because in the Middle Ages, beauty did not protect you from shame. It was shame postponed. The candle burns lower now. Its flame wavers in the still air, casting long shadows across ancient wooden beams. Let yourself sink deeper into the quiet and listen closely, not to voices, but to the subtle clinks and murmurs of a medieval apothecary tucked away behind a market square. It smells of mold and roses, lavender, and something faintly metallic, almost like blood. This is not a place for healing exactly. It is a place for transformation, and the customers are almost always women. The shelves are crowded with tiny glass bottles, ceramic pots sealed with wax, bundles of dried herbs tied with fraying twine. Each one promises something: fairness, smoothness, allure, and each one whispers a warning. But no one listens to warnings when they're chasing beauty. A woman approaches, veiled. She does not give her name. Names are too revealing, and besides, beauty is a secret battle. She opens her purse and slides a few silver coins across the table. The shopkeeper does not smile, only reaches beneath the counter. Out comes a tin vial. Inside, Venetian ceruse, the most prized cosmetic in Europe. A creamy white paste made of vinegar and lead, aged in clay pots until it gleams. It will make her skin luminous, moon-like, untouched. It will also seep into her blood, destroy her kidneys, blacken her teeth, and eventually steal her mind. But not tonight. Tonight, it will just make her beautiful. In the Middle Ages, there were no ingredient labels, no safety warnings. The Church controlled most knowledge of medicine, and what little information existed was guarded or based on rumor or prayer, so women turned to what they could find. Strange combinations of plants and minerals passed down through whispers and maternal lore. A bit of burnt alum to smooth the skin, powdered lily root to reduce redness, arsenic in small doses to lighten the soul, as some said, and egg whites, oh yes, egg whites, applied in delicate layers over the face and neck, left to dry into a thin mask that cracked if one dared to smile too much. Smiling was discouraged anyway. Even perfumes weren't just about scent, they were protection, masking not only body odor, but also the smell of decay from the very products meant to enhance one's charm. Musk from animals, civet from the glands of wild cats, ambergris, yes, the waxy bile of whales, to hold it all together, all to smell not like life, but like elegance. Some women became their own alchemists. Locked in their chambers, they mixed and melted, stirring concoctions into the night by candlelight, hoping to bottle desire itself. But chemistry, at that time, was dangerous. One wrong herb could paralyze. One misstep could ignite a fire, or worse, a scandal. Because even the pursuit of beauty had its limits. If you were too obvious, too eager, too transformed, they might call you a deceiver, a temptress, a witch. Beauty was to appear natural, even when it cost your health. You were to look born this way, even as you ingested mercury pills or used urine to fade freckles. Yes, urine. And if that didn't work, there were more drastic methods: bloodletting to balance the humors, or drinking tinctures made from crushed beetles laced with opium meant to calm the nerves and brighten the eyes. These weren't just acts of grooming. They were rituals of suffering, quietly endured. Because to be beautiful was to be worthy of safety, and to be plain, or worse, aging, was to risk being ignored, abandoned, or accused. So tonight, as you drift gently towards sleep, imagine her again, a woman in a shadowed room, applying thick white paste to her cheeks. Her hands tremble just slightly. She does not know the damage she is doing, or perhaps she does, and simply chooses it anyway. Because in her world, there is no safe path. Only trade-offs, only masks.
The world outside is dark now. Even the dogs have quieted, and the night air presses softly against the shutters. Let yourself breathe deeply. Inhale the scent of old wood, of worn linen, of the faint smoke curling from the hearth. You are safe and warm. But she isn't. Not quite. She's sitting beside the embers, a cloth over her face, soaking wet with vinegar. Her skin stings, her eyes water, but she doesn't flinch. She's hoping, praying, that by morning she will look a little more like nobility, or at least less like someone who belongs in the fields. In the Middle Ages, pale skin wasn't just attractive, it was a proclamation. It meant you were rich enough to stay indoors, that your hands didn't till the soil, that your life wasn't ruled by weather or work. Whiteness was purity. Whiteness was grace. And more than anything, whiteness was safety. To be dark or ruddy-skinned as a woman, that was to be mistaken for a servant, or worse, for someone with loose morals. The church reinforced this idea constantly. Paintings of the Virgin Mary showed her with ivory skin, smooth and glowing, untouched by hardship. Saints, too, were shown as delicate and fair, even if they had lived under the sun their whole lives. Holiness was bleached, and women noticed. So they chased this ideal in every way they could. They avoided sun like it was sin. Hats with long veils, wide hoods, closed windows during the day. The richer you were, the more shaded your life became until it resembled a kind of indoor exile. But for those not born into paleness, there were methods. Oh, were there methods. A common one was a mixture of vinegar and crushed white lead, painted onto the skin every night, layer by layer, until the complexion became paper-thin and ghostly. It caused rashes, ulcers, and eventually neurological damage. But in the short term, it worked.
There was also Ceras, still more lead-based and immensely toxic, and chalk powder, which dried the skin until it cracked. Some women turned to raw meat masks, others to bleaches made from mercury, all for that cold moonlight sheen. And yet, the irony, the bitter irony. Pale skin might win you admiration at a feast, but it wouldn't save you in childbirth. It wouldn't cure you from fever. It wouldn't feed you through famine. And in time, the very products that made you beautiful would start to erode your body from within. Teeth turned black, hair thinned, bones softened, minds fogged. But by then, it was too late. And what else was there? Refusing to conform meant risking ridicule, or worse, invisibility. In a world where a woman's value was constantly measured by how she looked, not how she thought, appearance was survival. One could argue, cruelly, that no one forced them, that no one held them down and said, "Whiten your face or perish." But wasn't it the same in the end? When society only praised a narrow ideal, wasn't the pressure itself a kind of cage? So tonight, as you nestle deeper beneath your blanket, imagine the flicker of a torch through stained glass. A procession of women in heavy gowns, their faces gleaming white under layers of poison. They nod, they smile, they sparkle under candlelight. They're beautiful by medieval standards, and many of them will not live past 30. Because pale skin, like any illusion, came at a price, and some women paid it all.
The castle still sleeps. Stone walls murmur with the sounds of the night. Wind brushing through arrow slits, a rat shuffling beneath the floorboards, the creak of timber under its own weight. But up in the chamber, someone is awake, and she is not breathing freely. Not because of fear, but because she simply can't. The maid pulls the bodice tighter, inch by inch. Her arms strain. The laces squeak against the thick fabric. The woman at the center of this quiet ritual stands with arms raised, her lips slightly parted, her ribs already aching. She dares not exhale, not until the last knot is tied. This is not yet the corset of the Renaissance. In the high and late Middle Ages, there were kirtles and cotehardie, tight-fitting undergowns laced along the sides or front, worn beneath surcoats and mantles. They weren't steel-boned yet, but that didn't make them kind. The goal was the same: containment. The body must be smooth, controlled, upright. A woman's torso had to suggest modesty, discipline, and above all, fragility. Not the kind of fragility that suggested weakness, no. The kind that whispered, "I am too precious to labor, too delicate for work, too refined for breath." Tight lacing began early. Girls were trained into these garments like they were trained into silence. A loose kirtle was a scandal. A visible waist was elegance, and a curved back, so long as it wasn't from malnutrition, was a sign of breeding. But of course there was pain. The linen lining rubbed the skin raw. The pressure bruised the ribs, compressed the lungs, shifted the organs. And yet the worst part wasn't physical. It was cultural. Because you couldn't not wear it. To appear in public without the proper shaping was vulgar. It was loud. It was dangerous. A woman with a natural figure was considered suspect, too wild, too full, too uncontrolled. Her body, like her voice, had to be restrained.
Even for peasant women, the idea filtered down. While they couldn't afford elaborate garments, many bound their stomachs or wore simple stays under coarse dresses. They did it not for luxury, but for survival, trying to mimic the shapes of the elite, to pass, to avoid shame. And during pregnancy, the rules did not loosen. Special gowns were made to hide the swelling. The ideal body was not only thin and bound, it was unchanging. Women were to appear as though untouched by nature, by appetite, by time. Let that settle in your thoughts. Even as they bled, birthed, labored, and aged, they were expected to remain small, compressed, perfect. At banquets, they sat ramrod straight, not from etiquette, but because slouching in these clothes caused real pain. Dancing became a calculated performance, graceful, yes, but careful. Every movement had to maintain the illusion of effortless beauty, even when their breath came shallow and quick. And on occasion, they fainted. It was seen as charming. A swoon at the right moment, made a woman seem delicate, romantic, almost holy. No one asked whether she had eaten that day, whether she could breathe, whether her body was begging for rest. No, fainting, like fashion, was performance. Tonight, as you nestle into your soft mattress, feel the freedom of your own breath. Let your chest rise and fall naturally. Imagine how strange, how luxurious that would feel to her, this woman who lives centuries behind you, wrapped tight, aching, upright in her linen and velvet shell. She might envy you, or she might not even be able to imagine it, because when your body has always been bound, freedom feels like fantasy.
Drift deeper now into a world where silence is praised and modesty is worn like armor. The air is still, thick with the scent of beeswax and dried rose petals. A comb rests on the wooden table. Long strands of hair cling to it, gold, brown, black, red, but all soon to be hidden. Because in the Middle Ages, a woman's hair was never just hair. It was signal, it was scandal, it was sin wrapped in silk threads. You see, the Church, ever alert to temptation, regarded loose hair as deeply suspicious, especially when it belonged to a young woman. Hair flowed, swayed, drew the eye, and what drew the eye might lead to impure thoughts. And impure thoughts, well, those could damn a soul. So from the moment a girl came of age, her hair began to disappear. Not physically, of course, but symbolically. Wrapped, braided, covered, a tapestry of fabric, coifs, wimples, veils, and later hennins began to encase the feminine head like a sacred relic. To leave it uncovered was considered provocative, and in some places even punishable. Virginity, after all, was visible. Unmarried girls could wear their hair down, sometimes adorned with ribbons or flowers, but only on very specific occasions, weddings, holy days, perhaps a festival. The moment a woman was wed, her hair vanished beneath fabric, and with it, much of her perceived freedom. Veiling became a language, a kind of public code. One veil said, "I belong to my husband." Another, "I am in mourning." Another still, "I am cloistered from desire." Some styles were regional, some were religious, some were so elaborately starched and pinned that the woman beneath could hardly move her head. And all of it served the same purpose: control.
For noble women, the effort was theatrical. Hours spent with servants braiding hair into intricate patterns, which would then be hidden entirely under linen and silk. The irony was not lost on them, creating beauty no one would see for the sake of modesty. For commoners, the process was simpler, but no less expected. A scarf, a shawl, a kerchief, plain and practical, but mandatory. To let hair fall freely in public was to invite insult, or worse. Even in the privacy of one's home, hair was political. A wife who unpinned her veil too early or too often could be accused of vanity. A widow who let her hair grow long might be seen as mourning improperly or not mourning at all. A woman accused of adultery, her hair might be cut as punishment, publicly, violently. But the saddest stories were quiet. A girl, newly married, sitting by candlelight, learning to tuck away the only thing that had once made her feel beautiful, the heaviness of her veil, the silence that followed, the loss of movement, of air, of expression. Because to wear your hair meant to speak, and speaking
was not a woman's role. And yet, even under the veils, women found ways to express. A ribbon hidden in the folds, a braid only her maid would see, a scent of rose oil in the roots, meant for no one but herself. Tonight, as you lay in comfort, feel the softness of your own hair against your pillow. Let it fall where it wants, over your neck, your face, your shoulders. It's a luxury so simple, so quiet, that it would have felt like rebellion centuries ago. Hair is not a crime, but once it merely was.
Now let yourself slip even deeper, into a moment just before dawn. The world is still, the sky barely blue, and in a small stone room, a woman sits with her back straight, her jaw clenched, and a silver tweezer in her hand. She pulls 1, 2, 3 hairs from the front of her scalp. Each one makes her blink, but she does not flinch, because beauty demands obedience, and she's been taught that pain is part of it. In the Middle Ages, the ideal female face was not framed by hair, quite the opposite. A high forehead was considered regal, intelligent, pure. So women plucked their hairlines back, inch by inch, creating a dome of exposed skin where their natural growth once was. The process hurt, of course, but no one talked about that. Pain for women was expected, encouraged, and if the discomfort led to admiration or advantage, all the better. Eyebrows, too, were targeted. Thin was desirable, even non-existent, a delicate arch of suggestion rather than definition. And so the tweezers returned day after day to sculpt the face into something smooth, soft, unthreatening. But the face was only the beginning. Ears, pierced in childhood, stretched under the weight of heavy gold. There were no hypoallergenic metals, no gentle starter studs. Infection was common. Redness, swelling, oozing, hidden beneath veils or ignored altogether. Because to wear earrings was to show status, and pain for status? That was simply the way. And then there was waxing. Not the kind we know today, no perfumed strips, no soft lighting, no calming post-care balms. Medieval waxing was made of boiled sugar, resin, or even hot honey poured onto cloth and pressed directly onto skin. Legs weren't the focus, no one would see those, but underarms, faces, even forearms were targeted.
A noble woman might have her cheeks waxed before a feast, just to remove the soft hairs that caught candlelight. Smoothness, always smoothness. And it didn't stop there. In some parts of Europe, fashionable beauty included body shaping through padding and wrapping, not unlike the early forms of corsetry. Young girls were sometimes bound at the waist, thighs, or chest to influence development, to limit curves, to mold the body into something more poetic and less human. Behind closed doors, some women resorted to even more extreme measures: scarification disguised as ritual, hot blades to cauterize blemishes, needles used to break skin and drain impurity. There was no anesthesia, just resolve. But why? Because in a world where power was rarely theirs, beauty was one of the few things women could manipulate, and even that came at a steep price. One paid not with coin, but with quiet suffering, with scars that had to be hidden, with rituals performed in silence. There are records of noble women enduring hours of these treatments before weddings, feasts, or even visits from important guests. Sometimes they wept, but discreetly.
Sometimes they laughed, because what else could one do? They knew the cost, and yet they continued, because to be plain was to be forgotten, and to be forgotten was worse than pain. Tonight, as your limbs grow heavy and your mind drifts soft, think of those women, sitting in the cold dawn, removing pieces of themselves with each motion. They were not vain. They were not foolish. They were survivors, shaping themselves into what the world demanded, strand by strand, layer by layer. And now, at last, they rest. Sleep lingers softly on the edge of your thoughts. Outside, a light rain begins, gentle, steady, like the tapping of fingers on old stone. Somewhere, a bell tolls in the distance, and within a damp cellar or sunlit cloister, a woman leans over a bowl of steaming herbs, breathing deeply. Because tonight, she is not only grooming, she is conjuring. In the Middle Ages, science and superstition walked hand in hand. Alchemists searched for gold, herbalists searched for miracles, and women searched for beauty, often in the folds of ancient crumbling books or in whispered recipes passed down from grandmother to granddaughter. There were no dermatologists, no verified treatments, just faith and plants. A poultice of elderflower for smoothness, crushed marigold for sunspots, rosemary for clarity, mint for glow, rose petals for softness. The rituals were tender, earthy, fragrant, and sometimes fatal, because not all herbs were gentle. Belladonna, beautiful name, deadly purpose, was used to dilate the eyes, giving them a dark, glassy allure. A few drops, and a woman's gaze could seem ethereal, almost divine, but the same few drops could stop her heart. Hemlock, monkshood, foxglove, all known, all used, often sparingly, often not sparingly enough. The women who brewed these things were not witches, not always. Many were simply desperate, desperate to clear a rash, to shrink a blemish, to bring color to pale lips or flush to tired cheeks. When prayers did not work, they turned to plants, and when plants failed, they turned to potions made of alchemical hope. Some formulas promised youth, others promised fertility, or allure, or protection from evil gazes. There were recipes involving powdered unicorn horn, really narwhal tusk, dried viper, or even menstrual blood, dried and mixed with wine, all in the name of beauty and enchantment. It was hard to say where medicine ended and magic began.
Apothecaries, monks, wise women, each held different versions of the truth. In wealthier towns, merchants sold imported spices from the East, saffron, cinnamon, myrrh, used in everything from perfumes to face washes. In villages, simpler things sufficed: honey, mud, vinegar, egg whites, and sometimes ashes, wood ash, bone ash, even the burned remains of small animals crushed and blended into creams. There was a logic to it, buried deep in the alchemy. If destruction makes beauty, then fire is not to be feared. And so beauty became a form of belief, a private devotion. Each preparation a little prayer. Let this salve remove the mark. Let this rinse smooth the skin. Let this perfume hide the truth of me. But for many women, especially those without status, the price was not just physical, it was spiritual. If you were too beautiful, suspicion followed,
And if you were caught brewing your own concoctions, you might be accused of vanity or heresy, or worse, witchcraft. Still, they brewed. Still, they mixed. Still, they hoped. Because what else was there? In a world where they had no voice, no vote, no armor, beauty was the only spell they were allowed to cast. So tonight, as the rain falls gently beyond your window, think of her. A young woman crouched over a bubbling clay pot, steam rising around her like mist. Her hands stained with petals, her eyes reflecting the flicker of flame. She doesn't know if it will work. She only knows she must try. Because to not try is to disappear.
The fire crackles. Your room is still. And far away, in another time, another night, a woman lights a single candle in secret. She does not want to be seen, not because she fears being ugly, but because she fears being noticed. Because in the Middle Ages, a woman who was too beautiful was no longer admired. She was watched. The same red lips that once drew compliments now stirred suspicion. The same clear skin that once turned heads might now earn whispers. And if her beauty lingered too long, unaged, untouched by hardship, well then, what was she hiding? It was the 13th century, and fear ruled everything. Fear of famine, fear of war, fear of heresy, and most of all, fear of the devil, who, they believed, walked among them, especially in the shadows of women. The church had declared, Eve sinned through vanity. She gazed upon herself and gave in to pride. And so her daughters, it was said, must be watched. Beautiful women, especially unmarried or childless, were frequently accused of harboring secrets. Their beauty could not be natural. It had to be bought, borrowed, or bargained for. And bargains were made with demons. And so began a long, slow, burning terror. A widow who lived alone and wore perfume, suspicious. A young woman who used herbs to improve her complexion, dangerous. A midwife with smooth skin and bright eyes after 50 winters, unnatural. They called it witchcraft, but really it was a hatred of mystery and of women who refused to wither quietly. Sometimes the accusations came from neighbors, sometimes from priests, sometimes even from within families. A mother-in-law might mutter, "She keeps her beauty too well." A priest might ask, "How does she look so young in such sickness?" And the rumor would spread like fire on dry thatch. Suddenly, every cosmetic became contraband. Every secret blend of herbs became evidence. The mirror in her chamber, a portal. Her earrings, charms. The kohl around her eyes, a sorceress's disguise. Even the animals she kept were suspect. A black cat, a bird, a goat. All could be branded as familiars. She wasn't adorning herself. She was summoning. Trials followed. Not always formal, sometimes just public shaming. A locked door, a shaved head, a ritual cleansing, or worse, far worse. Some women vanished. Others confessed under pressure, naming recipes and remedies not as beauty aids, but as spells. A paste to soften hands became a potion. A balm for cracked skin became a curse. The irony, of course, was thick, because these same societies demanded that women be beautiful, pale, clean, smooth, and yet punished them when they succeeded too well. It was a game with no safe move, a trap disguised as aspiration. And the quieter tragedy, many of the accused weren't even trying to be beautiful. They were just surviving, cleaning, healing, aging gracefully, and for that, they were feared. Tonight, as you breathe freely in your bed, think of her, a woman whose only crime was the glow of her skin, the clarity of her gaze. She may have used rose water or a lucky charm, or maybe nothing at all. Maybe she was simply born beautiful. And in that world, that was enough to condemn her.
The day is quiet now. Birds have stilled, and the last echo of market voices has faded behind thick castle walls. You can almost hear the soft rustle of fabric, layer upon layer, as a woman moves carefully across a stone floor. She is dressed, yes, but is she clothed or caged? In the Middle Ages, fashion was not simply decoration. It was message. It was armor. And for women, it was often punishment. Start with the shoes. They were pointed, so pointed they curled like a scroll. Called poulaines, they were elegant, yes, but utterly useless. The longer the toe, the higher the status. Noble women wore them indoors, tiptoeing across rush-covered floors, unable to run, unable to flee. There was beauty in stillness. There was status in discomfort. Then the sleeves. Oh, the sleeves. Great sweeping tubes of silk and velvet, trailing along the floor, collecting dust and crumbs. Sometimes so wide a child could crawl into them. They looked majestic, of course, but try cooking, or working, or moving through a narrow doorway. You'd quickly realize these clothes weren't made for function. They were made for restriction. Now, imagine the layers. First the chemise, then the kirtle, then the surcoat, then the cloak, all under a tight bodice or a girdled waist. In winter, this meant warmth. In summer, suffocation. And underneath it all, the linen clung to skin, soaking with sweat, but never washed often, because drying fabric in a damp, smoky castle was a luxury. Smell became part of life, and beauty was expected to endure it. Color mattered, too. Rich blues, reds, and purples came from crushed minerals, insects, or imported dyes, all outrageously expensive. Wearing them declared your husband's wealth, but you couldn't choose freely. A sumptuary law might say, only wives of knights may wear scarlet, or no woman under noble rank may wear pearls.
To disobey was to commit a fashion crime, punishable by fine or even imprisonment. And yet the rules were constantly shifting. A queen might set a trend with a jeweled veil or an embroidered belt, and suddenly everyone else had to follow, or pretend to. Tailors labored endlessly. Servants stitched late into the night. A woman who failed to keep up risked not just ridicule, but suspicion. Because too much care in dress, you were vain. Too little, you were a disgrace. Too modest, frigid. Too alluring, temptress. Too elegant, maybe a witch. Fashion was a game, and it was rigged. Even mourning had a dress code. Widowhood required black or gray, unadorned, hair covered, and you wore it not for weeks, but for years. A flash of color too soon, and you might be accused of celebrating your husband's death. And sometimes the clothing was literal punishment. Women found guilty of adultery were forced to wear short, shameful garments in public. No veil, hair loose, humiliated by fabric. But the most heartbreaking of all, the bridal dress. Not white, not yet. That came centuries later. But fine, new, stiff with embroidery, heavy with promise. Worn by girls sometimes no older than 12. Too small to carry the weight of such silk, too young to understand the man waiting at the altar. So tonight, as you stretch out under your soft blanket, feel the freedom of cotton, of breath, of bare feet. Imagine the press of wool on skin, the pinch of tight shoes, the itch of unwashed linen. And then imagine having no say in any of it. Because in the Middle Ages, what you wore was never truly your choice. It was your role,
your punishment, your performance.
The bells ring faintly through the valley, not in celebration, but in warning. Somewhere, a girl has just been married. She is 12, maybe 13. Her dress is too long, her shoes too tight, her face powdered pale beneath a sheer veil. And in a hall filled with flowers and wine, she is praised for her beauty. Not for her thoughts, not for her will, but for her readiness. Because in the Middle Ages, a woman's beauty was not an end in itself. It was a promise of fertility, of obedience, of heirs. The younger the bride, the more valuable. Youth meant freshness. Youth meant pliability. And most of all, youth meant wombs that still worked. Marriage was a transaction between families, between fortunes, between fields. But the girl in the center, she was not the merchant. She was the merchandise. You could hear it in the language. She is ripe. She is unspoiled. She will bear strong sons. A woman's worth was measured not by her voice, but by her function. And that function was reproduction. Beauty helped open the door, but after that, it was the womb that mattered. Immediately after the wedding, the pressure began. The bride was observed, guarded, questioned. Had her blood come? Did it stop? Was there swelling in the belly? A failure to conceive brought shame, not to the husband, but to her. She was blamed, examined, sometimes even accused of sin. And if she did conceive, the joy was public, the pain private. Pregnancy was not gentle. There were no doctors, no prenatal care, no guarantees. Women gave birth squatting, lying on straw, surrounded by midwives and fear. They chewed on leather straps to keep from screaming. They prayed, and many did not survive. But if they did, their bodies were changed, stretched, torn, heavy with milk, and beauty, that fragile coin, began to fade. Sometimes the husband looked elsewhere. Sometimes the family whispered, "She's grown tired. She's no longer what she was." Because once a woman had fulfilled her reproductive purpose, her social shine dimmed. Some tried to reclaim it with perfumes, pastes, and lace. But others simply disappeared into motherhood. A cycle of feeding, bleeding, mourning, nursing, child after child. And each birth took a little more of health, of freedom, of self. Even the church weighed in. It taught that Eve's punishment was pain in childbirth, that suffering was redemptive, that a woman's body was meant to bleed for others, monthly, maternally, silently. And so she did. Noble women were lucky, some say. They had help, servants, rooms of their own, but their children were not truly theirs. Sons were claimed by fathers. Daughters were groomed to repeat the same path. And the mothers? They were praised, and then politely forgotten. Except when they failed. A miscarriage could be seen as a moral flaw, a stillbirth, a spiritual curse, a barren womb, the greatest shame of all. Tonight, as you rest, think not of palaces or painted portraits. Think of her, a mother, once a bride, once a girl, sitting in a cold room, rocking a child while the wind presses against the shutters. Her hands are dry, her waist is gone, her hair is tied back, her body tired. She is not less beautiful. She is simply no longer looked at. And in her world, that means
She is fading.
The fire is low now. The coals glowed like fading embers of memory. And there, beside the warmth, sits a woman with silver in her hair. Her hands are still, her back slightly hunched, and the lines on her face tell stories no one bothers to ask about anymore. In the Middle Ages, to be an older woman was to become invisible, and to age without beauty was to vanish entirely. Because beauty, you see, was youth. The soft skin, the firm body, the unlined face. These were signs of virtue, vitality, and worth. And when they disappeared, so did a woman's place in the world, especially if she had no husband to protect her, especially if her children had gone, especially if she dared to speak. Once she might have been admired. Her cheeks were once powdered, her hair once perfumed. But time took all of it, as it does to everyone, and left only echoes. A slight sag beneath the chin, a dullness in the eyes, a face that, instead of inviting praise, began to attract fear. Because the aging woman was not simply forgotten, she was feared. Feared for her wisdom, which was rarely welcomed. Feared for her freedom, which suggested danger. And most of all, feared for her silence. A silence that hinted at hidden power. A woman who could no longer be desired might instead be accused. She knows too much. She lives alone. She walks at night. She speaks to animals. And just like that, she became a witch. It didn't take much. A glance held too long, a bitter word at market, a sick cow, a bad harvest, a stillborn child, all became possible evidence that this old woman had caused it. And if she had once been beautiful, all the more reason to believe she had bargained for her youth and now paid the price. Some were cast out, others were brought to trial, many simply disappeared. But even those who were never accused lived with the weight of disappearance. Without youth, a woman lost her place at feasts. Her voice was no longer sought in conversations. She was passed over, both literally and socially. In paintings, older women were background figures, nurses, widows, servants, never central, never luminous. There were no beauty rituals for aging, no gentle creams, no age-positive poems. Wrinkles were not marks of survival, they were proof of decline. And yet, in the corners of their quiet lives, some women found strange freedom. They no longer had to please. They no longer had to paint or pluck or pinch. They walked in gardens alone. They read if they could. They whispered old prayers, stirred old pots, remembered when they had been watched and how it had hurt. And some smiled, because while youth had stolen their power and beauty had once caged them, age, finally, had let them breathe. Tonight, as you lie still, your own breath slow and soft, imagine that older woman watching the fire die. No longer plucking her brows, no longer whitening her skin, no longer trying to fit into a dress made for a younger self. She is not sad, she is simply beyond performance. And in her stillness, there is peace. The night is nearly over now. Outside, the stars begin to fade. A pale blue touches the horizon. And somewhere, in a quiet medieval chamber long forgotten by time, a mirror rests on a table, cold, cracked, and utterly still. No one is looking into it. Not tonight. But if you did, what would you see? Would it be the young bride, trembling beneath a veil? The mother, swollen with life and burden? The noblewoman, powdering her face with poison? The widow, pulling a comb through silver hair by candlelight? Or would you see yourself, reflected, refracted, touched by their stories? You see, beauty in the Middle Ages was never really about beauty. It was about control. Control over the body, control over morality, control over a woman's choices, voice, fate. To be beautiful was to be visible, but only in the right way. To be obedient, alluring, pale, thin, silent, desirable, but never desiring. And if you failed at this, you were punished. And if you succeeded too well, you were punished too. It was a trap, decorated in lace. But still, they tried. They tried to make something lovely out of what they had. Herbs from a garden, ribbons from a market, a song hummed while braiding hair, the quiet hope that perhaps, just perhaps, beauty could buy them a better life. Sometimes it did. Often, it didn't. But the courage was in the trying.
Now, centuries later, the rules have changed, the faces have changed, the rituals have changed, but some echoes remain. We still speak of anti-aging, as if aging were a crime. We still whisper about women who try too hard. We still reward the appearance of effortlessness, even when effort takes hours, money, pain. So tonight, as you lie there, eyes growing heavy, remember this. You are not a reflection in someone else's mirror. You are not a candle to be snuffed when the room forgets you. You are not your skin or your hair or the lines on your face. You are the sum of all the women before you who suffered, who smiled, who survived. And if they could speak across the centuries, through the smoke and the silk and the silence, they might not ask for pity. They might ask for gratitude. So give it freely. For your soft bed, for your unbound hair, for the right to age in peace. And now, close your eyes. Let go of their weight. You are safe. You are enough. You are home. Good night.